You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. All right, folks, my Roland Martin Unfiltered fans, we are here in Charleston, South Carolina with Tom Steyer. Good to see you again.
Roland, nice to see you too.
All right, first and foremost, before we talk about your 27-page plan for Black America, it did not take long for Vice President Joe Biden to come after you in last night's debate. Do you think he is concerned with the inroads you're making with African Americans?
Well, of course he is. I mean, I think that he's under the impression that somehow it's not right for somebody else to compete for votes in the African American community. And I think that obviously African Americans, in my mind, have been the moral leaders of this country for a long time. This is a state that has a very high percentage of African American Democrats. And I'm looking for South Carolina African Americans to lead the country again and to set a new stage for, you know, where we go as a Democratic Party and as in America.
Let's actually talk about that because obviously you spoke at the National Action Network Ministers Breakfast. 65% of black voters in this Democratic primary,
right,
African American. This is the first of the first four primaries where black voters really get a say.
Yes.
What has it been like for you as you travel around this state? What have you been hearing from African Americans, what they want out of a Democratic nominee?
Well, let me start by saying, Roland, and I think you know this, that I've been here more than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And what I hear from African Americans in South Carolina, but also across the country, is this: broken promises from politicians. They want somebody who actually will tell the truth and deliver. Because I think African Americans have been hearing a lot from Democratic politicians every 4 years when they show up for votes and not much in between. So I think the first thing is they want to believe that what someone says is going to be true. Mm-hmm. I think what they want to believe, what they want is an acceptance and an awareness of the fact that there is a gross racial subtext in virtually every policy area. Mm-hmm. And that it's systematic, that it's deep, and that unless it's addressed, you're not going to deal with the subtext of racism, and you're not going to deal with the policy itself. And so I think that African American voters want an awareness that, hey, this has been going on forever. And it's time for it to stop, and we've got to start talking about it directly, talking about how we got here, and talk about what we're going to do actually to repair things going forward.
Were you surprised when you brought up reparations in the debate, how quickly conversation shifted?
You know, without teasing, no one will even talk about it. You know, I'm for it, and I say I'm for it because I think it's important to tell the truth. And I think reparations are about truth. It's about saying something happened. Something terrible happened. It's caused a lot of damage. We need to admit both those things, and then we need to talk about how we repair the damage that's been done. Mm-hmm. What I see, and this wasn't the only debate, Roland, I don't mean to be cynical, but I remember the last time they asked people, and I think both Pete Buttigieg said he was for a House bill that no one knew what it was for. I mean, people don't want to talk about reparations. And it's funny, I was talking to an African American woman several days ago, and she said to me, look, there are people on that stage who want to have free healthcare for everyone in the United States. There are people on that stage who want to have free college for everyone in the United States. There are people on that stage who want to have free preschool for everybody in the United States. Why is there only one person who wants to talk about repairing the damage of slavery, which has been going on for 400 years?
But isn't one of the issues that is very interesting? You come to South Carolina, and all you hear on mainstream media, black voters, black voters, black voters, black voters, black voters. Nevada, it was Latino voters, Latino voters. Yet, I actually never hear any of these people say white voters.
I agree with you, and there's an assumption here, which I don't agree with, that somehow everybody else is a special interest. Mm-hmm. But that white voters are the main interest. And you know that, as you know, I'm from California. Mm-hmm. California is a majority minority state. Mm-hmm. Everybody's a minority. There is no majority. Mm-hmm. So in fact, you know, the idea that you're talking specifically to an issue that directly relates to community is normal. It's absolutely appropriate. And there is no majority who is, in the background all the time as the actual voting control. It's not true in California. And so it's a completely different way of thinking.
Let's talk about this plan you released. It's 27
pages.
Pages. It deals with, obviously, voting, voter ID, deals with the census, also increasing representation of African Americans in government, healthcare reparations. One of the things that, of course, Senator Elizabeth Warren talked a lot about is the issue of maternal care. And it's very interesting because when I had a very pro-life black conservative on my show, was talking about why do you support people who abort black babies and on and on. And I said, wait a minute, you're pro-life. Show me where's your plan that deals with maternal care, dealing with prenatal care, dealing with what's happening with black women in childbirth. I said, if you really want, you want to deal with me on this pro-life issue. I said, okay, are you pro-life in terms of the womb, or are you pro-life
forever? I completely agree with that. I mean, are you now for making sure that there's subsidized childcare? Are you now in favor of Head Start for everybody? Are you now in favor of universal preschool for everybody? I completely agree. I mean, there's a real question here. I mean, Elizabeth Warren's point about maternal care and how different it is for black women than for white women is true. There is racism in this system. Some of it is specific, some of it is attitudinal. And it's true that, you can look at the exact same system and black women get different treatment given the exact same circumstances than white women. And it's racism from the people who are delivering the service. And it's got, it's sort of like saying in the criminal justice system that there is racism in the way that police officers treat people on the street based on color of their skin. Yeah. And the same thing is true, it turns out, in a hospital room or a maternity ward.
When we talk about criminal justice reform, you have on here, restore the Department of Justice, also restore judicial discretion through repealing mandatory minimums.
Yes.
There are a lot of Democrats who have been voting for mandatory minimums on the federal and the state level as well, obviously in cash bail.
Which we did in California, you know that. I
Right.
pushed really hard. We did end cash bail in California. Mandatory minimums really were a way of making sure that the system had no leniency, had no discretion, and was harsh. I think that somewhere, after post 1980, there was this absolute reckless, racist attempt to incarcerate as many people as possible in as harsh a way as possible for as long as possible, without any concern for their humanity, without any concern for their family, or any concern for rehabilitation, or what happened after they were incarcerated. I don't think there's any question about it. And mandatory minimums were part of it. I mean, in California, I pushed to end something called automatic sentence enhancers. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but it basically says that if you get convicted of a crime, if you have a previous crime, you automatically get a longer sentence. Automatically.
Right.
And it's just another words for mandatory minimums. Harsh sentencing, automatically the judge has no discretion. That's all that really is.
I was very much bothered in the debate when there was one question that came up dealing with housing, yet the moderators didn't even mention the fact that black home ownership, that is lowest rate since housing discrimination was legal.
Yes.
And I'm sitting there going, okay, like literally no mention of that. And so when we talk about your particular plan, let's talk about what it means in terms of what will you do as president to deal with the housing issue, not only affordable housing, but the home ownership rate.
So let me, I want to answer that question, Roland, but I want to give a little preamble to it that I think you know. I started a community bank 15 years ago to try and bring money to black people, Latinos, and women that I felt the financial services industry and banks discriminated against, to support people in terms of black entrepreneurs who couldn't get a loan to build their business. Affordable housing, we've supported over 8,500 affordable housing units in the last 3 years. Every single place where we felt there was discrimination, we were trying to go after it to provide the money that otherwise would be available if there weren't prejudice. In terms of, if you look at this plan, we know that there's been redlining forever. We know that in fact, That's a huge reason for the disparity in black wealth versus black family wealth versus white family wealth. The inability to basically tap into the family wealth generator, which is a home supported by a mortgage, where you pay down the mortgage, the house goes up, and that's your wealth. Mm-hmm. One of the things that in there is subsidizing down payments for people. And that's got to be done. Look, when I talk about reparations, and I'm for reparations, the question to me is not whether there should be reparations, but the best form for them to take. One of the real questions here is, given the redlining, given the discrimination, given the fact that people have been shut out of that, is the answer to give people down payments. Mm-hmm. And what I don't want to do, look, as a white person, it's absolutely improper in my mind for me to sit here and say this bad thing happened and here's how we're going to redress it. What is okay for me to say, I think, is this bad thing happened. We have to recognize it. Now let's tell the story and sit down and come up with the solutions together, because we need to explain how we got here, but we also have to explain why the solution fits how we got here and how it's going to take us forward. And one of the real questions here is, should there just be down payment assistance? Yeah, that's one of the things I definitely am sitting here in the back of my mind thinking, we know there's going to be a lot of money. We know it's got to count, it's got to be meaningful. Right. And the only question is that what's the best way to, and I don't want to prejudge. I think that there's a real question. This has got to be, that's why I called it a commission. People have got to be sitting there talking about what happened and what the right thing is to do to repair it.
Because the reality is, I mean, look, my parents are 72. My dad will be 73 years old in April. My mom will be 73 in November. And the reality is they had to deal with the issue of they were impacted by these housing laws.
Of course they were.
And there are significant number of African Americans who are still living. And so when people talk about, well, slavery is so long ago, not realizing that there are people who are living who had to deal with Jim Crow. And we're talking about, look, Fair Housing Act was only signed in 1968. You're talking about then we're dealing with enforcement. You know, we're now into the 70s.
Look, the other thing that's true, Roland, is this. Look, I was talking last week to a black guy who runs a movie theater, a big fancy movie theater with a bunch of, sort of food court stuff associated with it, and he wants to build a series of them. It's very successful. Mm-hmm. He'd previously worked at Citibank. I mean, this is the kind of guy you think, okay, this is a guy a bank's going to lend money to, right? Obviously. Couldn't get a loan. Mm-hmm. Couldn't get a loan, had to finance his money completely from a shoestring. When he finally got a loan, the rate was 15%.
Right.
That is a tax on being black. It's a very heavy tax on being black.
Well, absolutely, because if you look at the whole issue, same thing with student loan debt. You look at credit, you look at high interest rates, and so the tax comes in auto loans, it comes in home loans, and poor people are having to pay a much higher rate. Yes.
And that's exactly why we started the bank. You either can't get anything, or you're paying a usurious rate that rips you off. And we're saying, no, that's why we started the bank, was to say that is prejudice, that is discrimination in a way that hits people right where they live, in their pocketbook. It's just not fair. And so when you look at what we're trying to do, you're talking about home loans, our attitude is give people. Do I want to double the minimum wage? You bet I want to double the minimum wage. Do I want to cut taxes for people who make less than $250,000 by 10%? I definitely want to do it. Right. But do I want to also put new people in charge of their destinies, own their houses, own their businesses, have control, not just get a good deal? Yeah, that's really the purpose, is to change who's in control, change all of that around.
The last question that again I didn't hear come up in the debate. When we talk about black businesses, the fact of the matter is there are 2.6 million black-owned businesses, but 2.5 million have one employee.
Yes.
And so you talk about capacity to be able to grow as well. How does your plan address that, and not just in terms of capital, but also contracts? Also, when it comes to, I'm reading Bob Brown's book, and he talked about the Office of Minority Business Enterprise and how that really opened up the opportunities for black businesses when Nixon was president, but he was the one who was charged saying no.
Pounding on the door.
Create these opportunities for black businesses.
And Roland, you heard me say this morning, that they just built the Raiders Stadium in Las Vegas.
Right.
And 1 out of 100 contracts went to a black-owned business.
Right. 1 out of 100 contracts for a stadium that black players are going to be playing.
Dominate. 60%, 80%, I don't know the number, but it's something in that range.
Right.
And so I look at that and I go, that's just and that's why I said, anytime you talk about pushing for inclusion of black business, people start going like quota, quota, quota. I'm saying, oh, there is a quota. It's 99% for the Old Boy Network. That's the quota.
Right, and it's still happening on a federal level. Look,
Can't have it.
It's a $1 trillion 401k plan, pension plan on the federal level. African Americans only manage 100 million,
and they do better.
1 trillion,
and they have a higher return.
And do better.
And so my point on this is this is exactly my point. We need to acknowledge race explicitly. It's being acknowledged every single day in a negative way, implicitly. We have to bring that out, and then we have to repair it. There's something wrong here, and unless we call it out and talk about it, then we can't say, hey, 1 in 100 contracts in Raider Stadium. That just can't happen. Cannot happen. So let's stop the world here and decide how we're going to change that number, and we're going to get black-owned businesses to be doing this work so that black people are in charge, so they can build their business, build their wealth, and get control. I want people to have control.
I do. This is the last question. Alicia Garza sent me this. She said, ask Tom about the belt you brought back from Africa.
Yeah. So I went over to Africa. I'm wearing it. I wear it all the time, every day. It's from Kenya.
Okay.
I went over there to look at schools for girls. Because in a lot of the world, including in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, girls don't get educated at the same rate as boys. Not as long, not as well. Because, you know, that's a classic gender-based thing that's all over the world. The reason I wear the belt is some friends of mine were supporting schools just for girls, poor girls, so that they could go through high school. Turns out, when girls get educated, they save the world. Everything good happens. If you literally said the number one thing we could do to stop the climate crisis in the world,
right,
educate girls. And so the reason I wear the belt is to remind myself about the importance of doing the right thing towards people, that it has a ripple effect that goes on forever. And doing the wrong thing has a ripple effect that goes on forever. And so I wear the belt, same reason I put a cross on my hand. Say, if you do the right thing, a lot of good things happen that you intend, and a lot of good things happen that you never thought of. But that's how good things, that's what you're on the earth for, to do those things.
Well, I know you got to go campaign. You released the report. People can watch tomsteyer.com. They can actually go take a look at it.
And if they have suggestions, Roland, I want to hear them. Look, that report wasn't written in a boardroom. That report is a result of years of talking to people on the street, of going to people's homes, of seeing how people live, seeing what's really going on in the real world. I am someone who believes every single policy issue has a huge racial subtext. And just as we were discussing in terms of the Raider Stadium, unless you talk about it, then there's then there is inherent structural racism that exists that you're not pushing back against. That's what this report is about, is pushing back against structural racism that often goes unspoken.
All right, Tom Steyer, I appreciate it.
Nice
Thanks
to
so
see you,
much.
Roland.
Good luck on Saturday.
Thank you.
All right.
You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.